Nazis, commies, totalitarianism. Oh my. The word totalitarianism is a bit of a catch-all, a form of clickbait to describe any repressive government policy. Its colloquial synonyms might include tyrannic, despotic, or authoritarian. Hannah Arendt attempts to give totalitarianism a distinct meaning by treating it as a unique political and social system of the 20th century, and examining the historical forces of its two prime manifestations, Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. In Arendt's mind, these forces include acknowledging the specific historical and political space that Jews inhabited in Europe, and how Hitler exploited that space to rise to power, showing how capitalism created a class of superfluous people and the effects of dealing or not dealing with that group, as well as the foundation of their ideology, also known as a key to history, which explains all events past, present, and future. For the Nazis it was race, for the Bolsheviks it was class. What we will be discussing here today is Arendt's observations on the organizational innovation of totalitarianism. Because what made totalitarianism so special was not just that it resonated with the populace and took power, but that it maintained its fanaticism after it won the power. The structure goes as follows. At the center you have the capital L leader, then his inner circle, then the elite formations, followed by regular party members, then fellow travelers, and finally the national and international public. In totalitarian regimes, there are specific forces that flow into and out of this structure. From the center outwards, there is a stream of contempt. The closer you are to the ideological purity of the center, the more contempt you have for the outside rings. The paramilitary thinks the members complacent, and the members think the fellow travelers likewise. But the lack of initiation on the outer circles allows them to be gullible, and this gullibility is what makes them credible to the outside world. As Arendt says, it was only Nazi sympathizers who believed Hitler when he swore his famous legality oath before the Supreme Court. Members of the movement knew very well that he lied. Nothing is more characteristic of the totalitarian movements in general, and of the quality of fame of their leaders in particular, than the startling swiftness with which they are forgotten and the startling ease with which they can be replaced. The leader occupies a space that at its heart is a paradox. He is the most important and revered member of the movement, and yet merely a function of the movement itself. The leader has two main responsibilities: to create an alternate reality for the members of the movement, and maintain the movement's fidelity to that fiction. For Hitler, as we all know, it was the Jewish conspiracy. For Stalin, it was the Trotsky conspiracy. The power of totalitarian propaganda is that the conspiracy is as real and untouchable an element in their lives as the rules of arithmetic. The movements act as if the conspiracies are true and do more than merely dismiss debate, but deny that there is any debate to be had. In its simplest form, the role of the leader is to keep the movement moving. Because, as Arendt points out, if the movement stops moving, the fiction cannot be sustained, the project stagnates, settles, and then becomes another entrenched set of interests outside of the ideology. And above all, the leader must maintain, at least in image, the purest of ideologies. How the leader maintains his power is twofold. First, by staffing the positions around him so that anyone of relevance owes him loyalty. This is neither new nor special. But the second and unique characteristic of totalitarian regimes is that the leader designs the state apparatus to swiftly communicate the will of the leader to all ranks. In this way, he maintains the stability of his power by presenting himself as the one critical, indispensable feature of this movement. And yet, like the conspiracies that infect these movements, the leader's indispensable characteristic is also a fiction. He merely feeds the engine to keep the movement alive. The inner circle serves as a buffer between the leader and the rest of the movement. It provides a fog around him to prevent outer rings from seeing his fallibility, and give room for that cult of personality that capital L leaders are so well known for. One surprising feature of totalitarian movements is almost a complete absence of coups, which would almost necessarily come from this group. Hannah stresses that how totalitarian dictators avoid power contests is by keeping the inner circle atomized, along with the occasional purge. Officials of the highest order could and were demoted arbitrarily. Anytime a clique attempted to form, the leader would simply shift members around the organization. No lasting relationships were allowed, and therefore no plots could be formed. Because of this completely arbitrary and total power in the hands of the leader, the inner circle could not imagine anything except for trying to curry favor with him. The elite formations include the secret police and all paramilitary outfits. As we said before, the situation the leader must avoid is the stagnation of the movement. To maintain its motion, the leader is constantly inserting new layers of militancy into the bureaucratic organization. Arendt gives the example of the SA, the first paramilitary outfit of the Nazi Party. This was superseded by the SS, defined as an elite formation of the SA. The SS and the SA were then split up. After that came the shock troops, the death heads, the armed SS, and then finally the security service. The point was to keep a fluidity within the elite structure, and at the same time avoid the problems that come with targeting organizations for purging. By quietly reducing a group's relevance within the organization, no resistance would be found.
X gon' give it to you. Wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you. Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real. The non-stop pop-out, stay.
Now we start moving to the more disheartening outer circle. They provided a friendly face to the Sympathizers and an exclusive buffer between the Sympathizers and the elite formations. Their internal function is to be committed enough to the ideology to not require propaganda, but not so extreme as to push away the fellow travelers. Also referred to as useful idiots. This group in many respects is the linchpin in the rise of totalitarian movements. They run the front organizations and are the public face for the national and international public. They are also the most important target for propaganda. The fellow traveler must be fed a steady diet of pseudoscience and ideological justifications in order to be bent in the direction of the totalitarian movement, yet remain a non-totalitarian representative body to the world. The difference between a fellow traveler and a member is the fellow traveler believes the lies. Those completely outside the movement need to be insulated from its real aims. And yet they, like every person who is not of the master race, is only as relevant as they are useful to the historic trajectory of the ideology. To Arendt, the appeasement of Hitler by the international community during those early years was a result of the belief that totalitarian regimes have the ability to be honest. On the national side, if we all had the misfortune of having had fascism triumph, the German population was not too far down the list of people who needed to be exterminated. The racial ideology of Nazism was an authentic belief that was to be accomplished over millennia, and no one who was part of a lesser race was to escape it. The book was published in 1951, and it sounds like a book published in 1951. And by that, I mean it's hyper-cynical. To Arendt, totalitarianism was such a soul-crushing phenomenon that any other injustice just paled in comparison. It also being 1951, the analyses of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia were not evenly applied. Access to Soviet plans and files were limited compared to the Nazi regime, and it feels like Arendt is reaching for straws when it comes to her twin totalitarianism theory, the theory that states that Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia were the same political phenomena. Now, that is not to say that the Stalinist government was a good government, only that the Stalinist analysis feels like an afterthought while the meat and potatoes are devoted to the Nazis. Additionally, it's worth remembering that 11 million Red Army soldiers and between 7 and 20 million Russian civilians were killed in the fight against fascism, something they hardly get credit for in our popular remembrance of World War II. Arendt also takes a macro approach to her analysis, which brings with it a certain gloom, as she begrudgingly points out the moral differences between colonialism, imperialism, and totalitarianism, all but concluding that a decent collective existence for humanity is impossible if not only because the ghost of totalitarianism lingers around indefinitely, which makes other, though extremely brutal systems, preferable by comparison. I think it's important when discussing and thinking about these topics to always remember which side of the fence you're on. Are you the one doing the bombing or the one being bombed? Are you the one benefiting from the system or the one being exploited? And at what point, if we even have the right to have one, do we tell people, well, this is the best we can do? Arendt's conclusion that republicanism as a sort of best of worst systems is of little consolation to those that have suffered at its hands. I will forever be wary and skeptical of justifying systems that I personally benefit from. But then again, Hitler. Perhaps in this case, cynicism and realism converge. But I sure as fuck hope not.